Hi, I am Dr. Jeff Hester, and in a couple of days I'm going to be on the stage at Holy Cross College having a dialogue with William Lane Craig, question being whether theistic belief is rational in an age of science. And I just thought it would be a good idea to post my opening comments here so there's a nice clean copy of them, and so that people can refer back to them. I will post the slides from this as well, and I will also probably get around to posting some other segments talking about different parts of the arguments, specifically responding to some of Bill's arguments as well. So that material should be there. The webpage is jeff-hester.com _ unreasonable faith is the page for this. Okay. I am an astrophysicist, and I spent most of my career working on the kinds of stuff that you see on the screen. These days, I do some coaching, speaking, consulting, writing. But as a kid, mostly what I was a devout Christian. And I remained that way up until my mid-teens when a friend of mine made a comment one day. He said that the world might make more sense if there were no God. Now, I was appalled at that suggestion, and I set out to prove him wrong. And so I started looking at things and asking myself, does this make more sense if there is a God or if there's not a God? And much to my kind of shock and consternation, within about 6 months, I was an atheist. Bill is a Christian apologist. He starts by saying that he is certain about the answers and then tries to justify them. I'm a scientist. I start by saying I'm not certain about anything, but I have ideas. And then I challenge and test those ideas and see whether they can take the heat. If an idea can't stand that kind of scrutiny, then you have to give it up whether you love it or not. And if an idea can withstand that kind of scrutiny, you're stuck with it, whether you like it or not. In my world, I know means that I've worked as hard as I can to show that an idea is wrong, but so far have failed. And that's the standard I'm going to be applying here tonight. Now, Bill talks a lot about God as the best explanation of this or that. Here's how it works. I don't understand why the sun moves through the sky. Well, God's the best explanation. I don't understand why the wind blows. God's the best explanation. There are things that we don't understand about the Big Bang. Bill insists that God is the best explanation. I had a profound emotional experience, and it was God. Now, the problem with this is obvious. God did it can explain anything. No matter what happens, God did it, which means it really doesn't tell us much of anything about the world. Just because you don't understand something does not mean that God did it. Although over the course of history, as we have applied that standard of testable knowledge, the gaps in which you might try to hide God have pretty well gone away. I mean, this is what the people who wrote the Bible thought that the world was like. They presumably had some kind of hotline to God, except they got it all wrong. All of it. Time was that if you needed God to explain something, it was just about everything. These days, though, to find something that he needs God to explain, Bill has to poke around in arcane corners of cosmology. That fact in and of itself is telling. Now, the one place left where you might almost, or at least until recently, you might have almost claimed that you needed God or something supernatural to understand was mind. To talk about mind, we're going to have to talk about our origins, and to talk about our origins, we're going to have to talk about evolution. Now, I have to say, I laugh when I hear people talk about evolution. Oh, evolution can't do this. Because while people were shouting at each other about evolution, a bunch of really practical, pragmatic-minded engineers went off and just started using it. They now use evolutionary algorithms in design all the time. Here's how it works. You start out with a bunch of designs that might even be completely random. You evaluate them, see which ones do better. You throw away the ones that didn't do so well. You keep the ones that did better. You shuffle their properties. You change a few things at random. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And you just keep going around that loop. And as you go around that loop, your designs get better and better and better. Now, we've been using evolutionary algorithms for a while now, long enough to have a pretty good idea how they behave. And the answer is that in many, many situations, they just wipe the floor with traditional design methods. And in particular, they are really good at finding innovative designs that no designer ever would have come up with. Life obeys that algorithm. Life logically must evolve and adapt. No guiding hand is needed. If you look at time scales, for example, to go from Australopithecus to Homo sapiens, you had 150,000 trips around that loop I just showed you. Claims that evolution cannot explain the properties of life on Earth are absurd, period. Another thing, people talk about the origin of life being difficult. It turns out that it's looking less and less difficult all the time. Quoting Jeremy England at MIT on some recent really nifty work, the existence of life is no mystery or lucky break, but rather follows from general physical principles and should be as unsurprising as rocks rolling downhill. All right. Evolutionary biologists talk about the 4 F's of evolution. There's feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproducing. We have 2 great evolutionary adaptations, our brain and our tribes. Humans are profoundly tribal. We will do anything, say anything, and sincerely believe anything if that's what's required by our tribe. And it's easy to understand why, on the savannah without your tribe, you were somebody's lunch, and you weren't going to pass your genetic material along to anybody. Ironically, one of the best places to see the effect of tribalism today is looking at religious belief. If I know the happenstance of your birth, if I know your tribe, then with very few exceptions, I know what your religious beliefs are. People may imagine that they get their religious beliefs through the power of Scripture or through divine experience. The data say otherwise. Theists get their religious beliefs from their tribes, who got it from their tribe, who got it from their tribe, who got it from their tribe. Now, eventually, we do have to ask the question of where those beliefs came from in the first place. To ask that question, we need to look at how it is that we perceive the world. Now, most people have a common sense notion of perception that the world just kind of comes to us passively through our senses. It turns out that almost self-apparent notion is dead wrong. The reality is way cooler. 100 years ago, physicists revolutionized our understanding of the world. Right now, we are in the midst of a revolution in our understanding of our minds and ourselves. Here's Anil Seth of the Sackler Center for Consciousness Science to tell you about your predictive brain.
You might have heard that we know nothing about how the brain and body give rise to consciousness. Some people even say it's beyond the reach of science altogether. But in fact, the last 25 years have seen an explosion of scientific work in this area. If you come to my lab at the University of Sussex, you'll find scientists from all different disciplines, and sometimes even philosophers. All of us together trying to understand how consciousness happens. Instead of perception depending largely on signals coming into the brain from the outside world, it depends as much, if not more, on perceptual predictions flowing in the opposite direction. We don't just passively perceive the world, we actively generate it. The world we experience comes as much, if not more, from the inside out as from the outside in. Perception right here and right now is also a kind of hallucination, but a controlled hallucination in which the brain's predictions are being reined in by sensory information from the world. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time, including right now. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. And there are experiences of being a continuous and distinctive person over time, built from a rich set of memories and social interactions. Now, many experiments show, and psychiatrists and neurologists know very well, that these different ways in which we experience being a self can all come apart. And what this means is the basic background experience of being a unified self is a rather fragile construction of the brain. So our experiences of the world around us and ourselves within it, well, they're kinds of controlled hallucinations that have been shaped over millions of years of evolution to keep us alive in worlds full of danger and opportunity. We predict ourselves into existence.
God, this is cool stuff. By the way, for those of you who are in fields like education, this is the neurological underpinning of constructivism. All right, it's often said that seeing is believing. The reality is exactly the opposite. Believing is seeing. The Bible says, seek and ye shall find, and it's absolutely right. Seek and ye shall find whatever it is that your tribe expects you to, because again, that's what kept us alive over the course of our evolutionary history. Now, what's true of perception is also true of things like eyewitness testimony and memory. I won't go through details here except to say that accounts such as those of the resurrection check just about all of the boxes for circumstances under which eyewitness testimony and memory are highly unreliable. Okay, so where'd the notion of God come from? Well, that came out of our cognitive biases. Cognitive biases, in an evolutionary sense, are evolved adaptive processes that our brain uses when constructing our consciousness. Now, there's a long list of cognitive biases. I just want to talk about a few. One of those is that we perceive non-existent agency. That is, we perceive action with intention when there's really none there. This is a good one to talk about because it really highlights the difference between evolved adaptive perception and true perception. Turns out your dog perceives non-existent agency. You're sitting there at night, a limb blows up against the side of the house, and your dog just loses it. The reason for that is that in your dog's mind, this is what's outside and it's coming to get him. Well, let's think about that for a second. If it's really just a limb against the side of the house, then it didn't cost your dog anything to get upset. On the other hand, if there really is something coming to get him, getting prepared for it might have saved his life. Seeing non-existent agency is highly adaptive. Perceiving non-existent purpose is adaptive. We perceive non-existent pattern and meaning. We perceive non-existent entities and events. And then we have theory of mind, which means that we attribute mental states not only to each other, but to anything in which we have imbued agency. Put all of that together, and what our evolved adaptive brains just do is invent imaginary entities to explain the world and imbue them with agency, purpose, pattern, meaning, and mind. Now, if that's not a description of inventing gods, I don't know what would be. And we do this in a social context. And once a god gets built into the beliefs of our tribe, then it's hard to get rid of. Of course, every society ever has invented gods. Theism is just what our brains, our evolved adaptive brains, do. God is not a needed, best, or even useful explanation for anything. Theism is an artifact of our evolutionary history. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, I'm well aware that saying this makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Don't worry about it. That cognitive dissonance will go away. As we saw, it was adaptive on the savannah to accept the beliefs of your tribe. It's adaptive today to accept the beliefs of your tribe. And your brain isn't going to let you do anything as dangerous as reject what your tribe believes. So it's going to rationalize away any concerns that you have. So, okay, it is a reasonable question. If I know I'm not going to change anybody's mind, what am I doing here? Well, 45 years ago, I became an atheist. And at that time, hearing a talk like this would have been a lot. Largely because it would have let me know that maybe there were tribes out there where I would be able to belong without having to pretend that I believe things that I don't. There are people in the room who are at that point, who are kind of struggling with these questions. You're the people that I'm talking to. As viewed from the atheist side of the fence, and again, I've been an atheist for 45 years, I wouldn't go back for the world. Because from this side of the fence, without the veil of what is at best medieval conceptions of God, this is a really remarkable universe, world. We are extraordinary. All of that fills me with a sense of wonder and awe. I glory in it. We are not created beings here at the whim of some petty, narcissistic God that is so desperate to be worshipped that he'll damn us all to hell for eternity if we don't do our part. What we are evolved, emergent minds who have reached the point that we can look around at the universe and at ourselves and begin to understand. And again, that picture, I get far more out of that than I ever got out of theism. Now, that does bring with it responsibility. We are responsible for ourselves. We are responsible for each other. We're responsible for the world. Because if we don't take care of it, nobody will. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Well, my life feels meaningful, therefore it is. So what I had to say to those of you who are at that point of struggling with this kind of stuff is pretty straightforward. Come on in. The water's fine. All right. So that's kind of a cut at a first run through. I will be posting some other materials, some links to articles that I've written. I hope to post a few more recordings of responses to some of Bill's arguments. Various things. I have some concerns about sort of the intellectual honesty of some of what Bill does, and I hate to say that, but I've recorded something about that as well. And so I hope that you will watch, or did watch, the discussion. I think it has a lot of promise to be interesting and, who knows, maybe even meaningful. Thank you very much.